Hello, and welcome to Dear SQL DBA, a podcast for developers, DBAs, and really anyone who cares to listen about database, software development, and database-related things. There's a lot of things that are related to databases, though. With me today, I'm pretty sure, in fact, I'm positive, this is the first time I've ever had a guest on Dear SQL DBA. It's a big day for me.
Welcoming, I'm the first guest?
Yes, you are the first guest. And I mean, you could, in fact, be the only guest, depending on how this goes.
Well, don't make your judgment based on just me being your guest.
Welcome, Jeremiah Peschka, to the podcast. Would you like to introduce yourself to the Dear SQL DBA listeners, Jeremiah? Who are you?
It's like the hardest question. Who am I? I am a software developer. I work at a company called Watchful, where we make data labeling software to make machine learning experts' lives easier. And I've been doing this for a while now. And I used to be a SQL Server database developer and DBA and then consultant. Also been a graduate student. That was exciting.
Jeremiah is also my husband, for anyone who doesn't know. My first guest on my podcast is also the person I'm married to. And we've actually done a bunch of work together in the past too. So we were together co-founders with Brent Ozar of Brent Ozar Unlimited.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
We worked at a company called Redgate.
Yeah,
we did. At the same time, we didn't really work together. We were sort of adjacent to one another, but we did a morning show.
We did do a morning show. It was the most watched morning show at Redgate, produced by Redgaters.
Yeah. It is the only morning show I know of at Redgate, produced by Redgaters.
Yes. That's
and we
also
technically
true.
We worked at a company called Stack Overflow.
We did
recently. Again, we didn't work together. We sort of worked adjacent.
Near each other.
Yes. Down the hall.
And now we're here. And we don't work together anymore.
For the moment. And maybe that could last. We'll see. It's going all right not working together too.
Disaster recovery for your income stream.
Yeah, at a certain point, you're like, wait, I realize that we actually work really well together, but how smart is this?
Yeah. I mean, if we're starting the business, not very. If it's a mature company, it's probably pretty safe.
Yeah. I don't know. In these days when suddenly banks can just be like, oh yeah, we don't got money anymore. Things get a little weird when things get weird these days.
Sorry, spent it all on scratch ops.
Speaking of things getting weird today, we were chatting about what we wanted to chat about, and we decided to talk about what has become of interviews in tech in this strange time we are. So there's a lot of interviewing going on in tech, I would say, because there's just a lot of churn.
There is.
There's always been a lot of churn, but in these, quote, economic headwinds, as everyone likes to say, like, whew, there's a lot of economic headwind lately.
You know, the opposite of a headwind, though, right, is like it's like, right, but it's also a breeze, and evaporation is a cooling action. So, like, you would think that like headwinds would bring some relief in a way while you're doing hard work.
You'd think. Instead, what it seems to have caused is a cycle of companies eliminating jobs and then re-adding jobs, and then eliminating jobs and then re-adding jobs, which just means doing a lot of interviewing, as well as people moving between companies doing lots of interviewing too, or even moving back and forth into the same company multiple times, which I've seen happen as well.
Yes, you do. But yeah, interviewing is... This is going on YouTube. Your channel's probably not rated R, so I'll just say unpleasant.
Yeah, I think I don't mark things as being for kids. I think you can say some swear words, but use your judgment.
Duty.
I did have a whole post about taking a dump before regarding SQL Server stack dumps.
Yes.
And
But
that one's all right.
interviews. We should talk about interviews because actually that's a sort of a silly kind of segue there.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know. Where do we want to start? They're like
Well,
notoriously terrible these days.
Yeah. So why are they terrible these days? So both Jeremiah and I have been on both sides of the interview table a lot in the last 5 years as hiring people, as interviewed people. So what is your least favorite thing from the candidate perspective that you've seen change in interviewing and really happen in tech interviewing lately? And by lately, I mean like 5 years.
I think it's sort of an increasing prevalence of these sort of coding challenge style questions that don't bear any resemblance to the real world. They are often problems that like your programming language or your database just solves for you. Like find all the duplicate items in this list. Like, cool. Yeah, I will use the optimized version of this. I will not solve this problem myself because that's what you do. I really don't like those kinds of questions because like my main beef with them is they're not indicative of what you actually do at work, right? Like, yes, sometimes I have to solve weird data structure-ish problems, but most of my job is like, and most software engineers' jobs, like most of us in general, and also most database DBREs and database administrators and data engineers' jobs, right, is you take the business requirements from the PM and you turn them into something the PM wants to see.
Mm-hmm.
And that's what you do for a living. And you're not like, oh, excuse me, let me reach over here, pull out my large college textbook full of terrible things I've forgotten, look one of them up and implement it myself for giggles. It's not work. Like for some of us it is. For all three of your viewers who work in either on the SQL Server engine or who write compilers, cool, you're awesome people, and I appreciate that I can do easy things because of you. I don't do that job. Why are you asking me these questions in an interview?
Though, truthfully, I think a lot of what those people do is figure out what the business requirements are for the thing they need to solve in the compiler or optimizer, or they're still actually doing something like, similar to what you've described, even if it is like super technical and dealing with, very base structures in some way. But
and hopefully they're also like, and did somebody else on my team solve this for me already? So I don't have to do something terrible that I haven't done since college.
Right.
And this is the same thing for like database, like DBRE interviews, right? Like if you were to go in and interview for a DBR position and someone started asking you like about spin locks or some other like esoteric SQL Server thing, right? Your first question would be like, do you run into this a lot?
Yeah.
And that's usually what I do too when people start asking me these kinds of weird things. And sure, right, there are times when you do have to know this kind of stuff. Like there was a situation at a previous employer where one customer just had like they were weird, right? They're a huge customer anyway, and they had a lot of sort of weird behavior going on that caused the product to just stop working sometimes. And so we had to go in and figure out why and do all this kind of spelunking, but it's not the kind of thing you expect somebody to do on day 2, right? You're not even going to know where to look in the product and right in a new code base to find problems like that. And it's usually kind of a specialized tool that only a few people on a team know and are working on, and they're usually your most experienced people. But you're still not, right? It was like this was using a debugger, finding the problem. This still wasn't a like so.
Yeah.
How can you find?
I've also seen descriptions. By the way, I haven't been a part of this interview. I have seen remnants of a process where the tech screen, it was I think it was it wasn't necessarily a take home. I think they actually had to be online for it. But like it was expected to take the candidate so long that they started having discussions about whether they needed to pay the candidates for their time to make it fair. And I think when you get to the point, like it's good to be thinking about what is fair for the candidate.
Yeah.
But when you get to the point where you're actually having to pay them for their time, like there's got to be a better way.
Yeah, I think so, right? It's one of the things that I always try to think about with coming up with interview questions is what signals am I going to get from this, right? It's the same thing as like when you're, when you're deciding what to monitor, right? Like what are the SQL Server weights that I actually care about?
Yeah.
Right. You don't just collect them all. And you're like, yes, I have taken out many read logs today. I should turn off the users. Like you don't. No, stop. What's the actual signal you need to make the correct decision?
Mm-hmm.
And so, the best interviews I have been in have asked questions that are very similar to what I do for a living. Like Redgate actually make reading code is what part of the developer interview at Redgate is, okay, here's some code, read it. And then they go through there, you go through, and then they start asking you questions about what you read in the code.
Oh,
and it's
that's very sensible.
Yeah, because most of the time you read stuff. You need to be doing this. If your job is just typing, like stop doing that. Your job is to fix problems, not to write more code. More code equals more problems. That's one of my favorite things. Like, what is that signal? How do we actually solve this problem? What is what we're doing a good match for you, and are you a good match for us?
Right.
And you want to make sure that the candidate gets an idea. Right. This is not just about gatekeeping who can come in. You also want to make sure that they want to come in and want to hang out with you, and that these are actually the kind of problems that you're doing. So the same thing happened at Watchful. Like one of the interview questions that we went through was really similar to the kinds of problems that we have to work with. And it was like, hey, can you solve this for us real quick? This shouldn't take very long. Mm-hmm. And it didn't take very long. It was pretty fun to do. It was mainly maybe 30 lines of code, 40 lines of code, something like that. But it was very, very, very similar to the kinds of work that we do on a day-to-day basis.
Yeah.
And it made a lot of sense. And it did tell me like, okay, yes, this is a company that works with machine learning, but I don't have to be, someone who did science Olympiad and math Olympics, right, to work there. Like, I can do this job. Like it's solving programming problems. Somebody else has solved the math. I can mostly read math. So it's on the internet. Wikipedia has fantastic explanations of all the math stuff. Someone knows how to do this for me. And there's enough stuff out there that can teach me how to solve math problems and understand why you do this way and why you're not taking a certain shortcut. But the interview itself was like, this is what you're going to do.
Right.
And that was really helpful. And that's really the kind of thing I think is really important, right? Is trying to find those things. Don't just go to some random coding website. Maybe, I don't know, I'm not going to name any of them, but right, we know what they are. You know who you are, and they have a purpose. Those kinds of problems have a purpose. Like there's competitive coding competitions that some people think are really fun. Our former coworker and old neighbor, who's actually worked with us twice, Onat. Hi, Onat. He just thinks this is fun. And so he does leet code challenges like every day because he thinks it's fun. Some people play MMOs and they grind away to get the best gear. Yeah. Right. And this brings him joy. Yeah. He loves solving these problems and trying to be the most efficient.
It's his Wordle.
Yeah, it's his Wordle. And it's really cool that he likes it. But that's not unless that is what you do at work every day, you don't ask people questions like that. And a lot of these questions too are like, please invent your own data structure. But this whole thing about that, right, comes from back in the dark ages when everyone was writing C. And C's standard library is very, very tiny, and it doesn't have lists. It doesn't have like dictionaries or hash tables. It has array. And that's it. And this is my abstraction: integer and array and for loop. And so, of course, it's important for C programmers to know how to make their own linked list or hash table or red black tree. But like in .NET, you're like, yeah, use collections hash table,
right?
And you're done. And so our as our languages get better, as our tools get better, we should be asking questions that are much more appropriate to the kinds of problems you're actually solving. Right. Like hey, Kendra, I've got this availability group and it's experiencing these particular problems, and then you could go back and forth and sort of like, what time of day is it? What else is going on when it happens? Blah, 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 blah. Until and like, yeah, that's a much better question for a DBRE than be like, can you explain transactional replication at the byte level, please?
I will say I did once have a real work experience where some of the devs started talking about, and this was like in the early 2000s. They were like, I think we need to write our own database and storage engine. And that was like a huge red flag. Because I worked at a company that actually had written, like at the time, they actually had written a log file processing system because there wasn't there wasn't like all of these NoSQL options for handling certain types of data they needed to handle. But at the time, there were already a lot of relational database options, which is what this team needed. So it was like, whoa, what is it that you need? I realize that you're excited about writing a new database. That's cool. But why?
Yes. And I think we actually did an okay job when we had the consulting company, right? Because a lot of it was like, here's this broken SQL server on Brent's laptop. What has he done to it now?
He's sitting there giggling.
Yeah, and he's like, or even like the MCM, right? Like the practical section of the MCM is, like, here's this thing you have to do. You have so many hours to accomplish as much of this as you can.
Yeah.
And that's very much like, real world scenarios, because you have to make trade-offs. You can't do everything. There's too much to solve in that brief. And so you have to figure out what's the important things to do to meet the customer's requirements. And, should everyone have to do an MCM to work somewhere? No. But it's a really good indicator of like,
no one can anymore.
Yeah, no one can anymore. You have to take Kendra's or Brent's.
You have to fight an existing MCM
that's
and
right.
take theirs.
There can be only one. So yeah, like find. I think the really important thing with interviewing is to find ways to, really understand how a person, like their thought patterns in a real world scenario. Like occasionally, you can teach a lot of people programming skills, right? You can teach someone to write crazy complex queries. You can, write your favorite programming language, which is obviously Java 7.
Obviously.
They're on Java 21 right now, just because I know you don't write Java.
But no version of Java is going to be my favorite programming language.
There you go. Right. And so, I was just saying, like, just figure out what the right answer is. Like, what do we need? Just do that.
I have a question for you. There's tech screening and then there's tech interviews. And I'm curious so one thing that I used to do, I'd have companies who wanted to hire a DBA, but they didn't have like a DBA to interview the DBAs, right? So how do you write interview questions when you don't have expertise in the area? So one of the things that I would help these companies do is write screening questions for their recruiter. And this was because they would get a lot of applications where maybe the person would have like a smidge of experience with the database, but like really not much at all. But this was a way that a recruiter could just ask, not stump the chump questions, but just like simple questions. In fact, things one could look up on the internet, but right, they're having a live conversation.
Yeah.
What do you, and the recruiter, of course, isn't an expert either. So these would have to be questions that can have clear right and wrong answers. Often, kind of like, and you have to give room for the interviewer to be able to understand different variations of answers, because people can answer multiple ways, right? But I worked on trying to make these reliable and safe. What do you think of those as a more senior person interviewing? Do you feel insulted if you're asked to do a tech screen or something like that?
Not at all. I think okay. I am not insulted, first off, by that kind of thing. It's a good indicator that these people are being thoughtful about everyone's time. Interviewing can be a huge time suck because you just get so many resumes. There are so many awesome candidates. You have to pick the right set of people to interview. Yeah. And even within that, anymore, I'm hearing stuff like, oh, we're getting 1,500 applicants for every job. And in addition to being a developer, this person must also be able to bench press 300 pounds. and people are still applying. And these questions just help you narrow it down further, because there is a skill to writing a really attractive resume. And you can do that if you're good at writing a resume. And a non-technical person may not necessarily know if this person is, full of BS. But the important thing is making sure, like you did when you wrote these questions for people, is that there's enough answers present that that they can actually get through. Because I've seen scenarios like this where the person will fail you because you didn't provide the one answer that they'd been given.
Yeah.
And that's no good. Or you didn't use the exact words that were on the paper, and so you don't get in, and that's no good.
Yeah. We have a comment in the chat from TZH who says, answering questions when it's clear the recruiter is reading from a script is just awkward. I can totally see how it is. And also says they're usually given keywords to look for in an answer, but as the interviewee, you want to see the people you're talking to understand. Yeah. I can see that as well. It is not a perfect solution for this problem. One of the things that also I would try to do with folks is give them something they could show to the candidate visually as well, because some of us don't do well just hearing questions audibly. And I don't like that's another learning style / working style that I think can be really hard with interviews where everything is purely verbal.
Yes.
Is for the candidate, some folks do a lot better if they can read the words on a screen. Of course, some people are the opposite. And then some folks do better if they can use writing or some form of jotting down an answer that's not purely verbal too. And trying to make an interview not biased one way or the other is really, really tricky.
Yeah. And I think it also too, right, it gives you an opportunity to, when you've written down the question that you want the interviewer to ask the candidate, it gives you an opportunity to be as clear as you possibly can.
Yeah.
Right. People can also read significantly faster than they can speak. So, the interviewer can be like, here, I'm going to put this slide up on the screen. Boop. Here's the words to read. When you're done, let's talk. And, you can even, you get nonverbal cues from people. You can get a lot of stuff there. It's pretty, I understand. Like, right. You're talking to even when you're talking to a technical recruiter, they may not actually be a software engineer or a DBRE or a database administrator. So you have to make it good. There's keywords, but this is hard.
Well, it's hard to do it quickly too, right? So I have had some interview cycles where I met with them 6 times over the course of 3 weeks. Like we're 3 weeks in, and I'm sort of like, we're really dating a lot.
Yes.
we need to wrap this up.
Yeah,
and you don't want it to drag on forever, but you do want to give everyone quality time. So there's a real balance there.
I think when you do that recruiter screen, the main purpose should be like, is this a human? Can they communicate without swearing constantly?
Which you may or may not want.
Yeah, if you do want them constantly swearing, that's fantastic. And that's kind of it, right? Like, just sort of, you kind of want that signal of like, is this person going to be an HR nightmare? Like, whatever the other signals you want to find are. But yeah.
So are you totally against hands-on demos in interviews, or do you think that they should be more like, oh, if they're actually related to what you're doing for the job, is that cool?
I think as long as it's related to the job, that's cool. But if you're like, I need you to reverse this linked list, I'm like, I have to go now. Because if that's part of what you do every day, like, no thank you. List.reverse.
It's interesting that CK Constantine, who I had the pleasure of working with at Stack Overflow, he found some tooling that let him set up some interesting SQL and Python hands-on interviews for and I really actually I never got to try it, but I was like, I want to try that. That sounds fun. But the challenge is setting it up in like an encapsulated, safe environment where nobody can actually harm anything, but you can actually run stuff. Hopefully there'll be more and more tooling that helps people set up real worldish stuff in something like that without it being, something that takes 3 years.
GitHub code spaces. You could potentially do something in there. Ephemeral cloud databases. If you're doing, performance sensitive stuff, that's a place you can go and recreate workloads. Give people logins that expire.
Yeah. Well, and I do think limit the amount of time you ask them to spend.
Oh yeah.
Too. Like
it's very much like I try to keep this to let's. For me, I like it to be synchronous. I want to talk to this person as they're working through a problem. I want these problems to be really small and bite-sized. I don't want it to be something that when you get handed it at the beginning of an interview, your first feeling is overwhelmed.
Yeah.
Like, because I don't want that to be happening where I work. And if the general mood of my place of work is overwhelmed, I will probably try to find somewhere very quickly where I can just be whelmed.
I did just realize I once had an interview where I actually flew internationally. I actually flew to another country to have an in-person interview. Now, they paid for the flight and the hotel, and I didn't have to self-fund my interview trip, but I didn't get paid for the time. But then there's kind of a perk because you are getting to visit another country.
Yeah, I mean, don't do what I did and don't go interview in January in England. And it's like, oh, it's very dark here, isn't it? Like, well, yes, and it's very north.
I forgot that you did that too, but it was a different visit. Yeah.
Yeah, I was looking for an apartment though.
One can put quite a lot of time into landing a job, or attempting to land a job. That's not something that is totally new. Well, if folks watching, if you have questions about how to interview better, either as a candidate or as an employee, you can email me at help@catalyzedsequel.com. It will be fodder for an upcoming podcast episode. And maybe sometime Jeremiah will come back on the podcast too. It's been really fun having you as my first guest ever.
It's been fun showing up as your first guest ever. Yeah.
It's kind of like we have a morning show again.
Yeah.
And now for the weather.
It's hot.
There won't be any weather. TZH says just don't go to England as a general rule. And then in parentheses, I'm from Manchester.
Now, by England, though, do you mean southeast near London?
Now we're going to get into it. Now we're going to get into it. I would love to come back sometime soon. I want to. I am definitely, well, not definitely. I plan to go to Germany for data grilling in the summer. Maybe there will be a way it can veer through the United Kingdom on that trip. And Jeremiah Peschka might go with me if you are a data grilling attendee or someone who might attend the event. It's a great little conference in Lingen, Germany.
We can hang out
I think they're going to open registration sometime soon. Their call for speakers is open now. So anyone who wants to maybe be considered to speak can check it out. I forget let's see what the website is. Is it datagrillin.com? We'll find out.
I don't know. What are even our websites? I just type into Google and I hope the right results come up and I hope it's not a scam.
It's May 16th and 17th of 2024 in Lingen, Germany. And yes, it's datagrillin.com. And I am sure somewhere on that website there is a link to the call for speakers that is open there.
You would hope so.
I hope so. All right. Thanks, Jeremiah. Thanks, everybody, for joining us.
Thanks, guests. Bye.
See ya again sometime.